A predator attacking a sleeping human is almost never the start of the story. In a global review of 440 large carnivore attacks from 1950 to 2019, that kind of attack stayed rare and abnormal. When researchers knew what kind of attack happened, about 49% were predatory, but roughly 91% of recorded deaths came from that predatory group, which is why a sleeper in a tent is such a serious warning sign. Healthy wild predators usually avoid people because humans are noisy, upright, group living, and risky, and for a hunting animal, one broken jaw, one torn shoulder, or one damaged paw can mean starvation. So this video is not about horror movie fantasy. It is about the hidden chain that breaks a predator's fear, collapses the line between human space and feeding space, and turns sleep into danger. By the end, you will see 5 drivers behind these attacks: food conditioning, predatory testing, injury, ecological stress, and climate-linked hunger, plus why a thin tent can become a smell-filled target. The first fact to lock in is simple. A sleeping human becomes vulnerable only after the animal has already crossed a deeper mental barrier and accepted that coming close to human space might pay off. That is why researchers do not treat most sleeping attacks as random acts of nature. They treat them as the last visible moment of a longer behavioral slide that started earlier. Sometimes that slide began with crumbs and trash, sometimes with prey collapse, sometimes with a painful tooth, and sometimes with a hungry bear spending longer on shore after sea ice pulls away. The clearest driver in North American cases is food conditioning, which means the animal links camps, packs, coolers, fish remains, garbage, toiletries, or vehicles with easy calories instead of danger. Habituation works beside it. Repeated non-negative contact teaches the predator that people do not always fight back. So the old caution that once protected both species starts fading step by step. The National Park Service says bears that keep getting human food can lose both their taste for natural food and their fear of humans. And those same bears often become more aggressive and unpredictable. That warning is not theory. In Yellowstone during 2025, a black bear first crushed an unoccupied tent, later broke through food storage, got campers food, and was then killed because the pattern kept escalating. Notice what that pattern means for a sleeping camper. The attack does not begin when the tent rips open. It begins the first time an animal learns that fabric walls often hide food. Once that lesson sticks, the tent stops being a strange object and starts becoming a thin wrapper around calories, body odor, soap, toothpaste, spilled drinks, cookware, and old food residue. That is why poor camp habits matter so much. Every unsecured cooler, scented bag, or fish cleaning mess can teach a lesson that the next camper, who did nothing wrong, may later pay for. The second driver is predatory testing, where the animal does not explode into a full kill at first, but approaches, bites, drags, or probes a resting person like a possible prey item. Scientific literature notes cases in which coyotes bit sleeping or resting victims while testing them as prey, which sounds chilling because it means the attack may begin as a question, not a charge. Wolf cases show a similar climb in boldness near camps. First the animals appear at night, then in daylight, then they follow people, then they take pets or scavenge camp areas, and finally a sleeper becomes thinkable prey. That sequence matters because it destroys the lazy idea that one dramatic night tells the whole truth. In many cases, the warnings were already there in smaller, stranger, bolder encounters. A sleeping person fits the prey pattern better than a standing one because sleep makes the body quiet, horizontal, slower to react, and easier for a predator to read as vulnerable. If the animal has already lost its fear, that posture can erase the last hesitation, especially in darkness, where scent leads the approach long before the human hears anything move. The third driver is injury, old age, or physical impairment, a classic route into man-eating among large cats that could no longer subdue normal prey without severe pain or rising failure. Historical and modern records keep pointing to damaged teeth, jaw disease, limb injuries, gunshot wounds, and even embedded porcupine quills, all of which make zebra, buffalo, or deer far costlier to hunt. The most famous case is the Tsavo lions, where later scientific work found strong evidence that the lion tied to more human killing had severe dental disease, including a painful root tip abscess. Researchers did not conclude that humans became a magical favorite food. They concluded that humans became easier than large prey that kick, gore, and fight back when every bite hurts. That same logic appears in later thinking about the Phu lion and many tiger and leopard cases from South Asia, where the deeper pattern was impaired hunting ability plus access to exposed people. So the old frontier line that every man-eater is simply starving is too thin. Injury can change the entire cost calculation, making a sleeping body seem easier than a healthy antelope. The fourth driver is ecological disruption, which pushes predators and people into tighter overlap when drought, habitat loss, prey decline, agriculture, livestock pressure, or disease reshape the whole landscape. In lion country, attacks can rise when people sleep in fields to guard crops from pigs or other raiders, because the predator may first come for those animals and only then encounter a human sleeper. That hidden chain matters. The lion may not leave cover hunting a person at all. It may follow prey, smell livestock, track waste, or move along farms until a sleeping body appears in reach. This is why documentaries miss the real cause when they show only teeth and darkness. The true setup may include broken prey systems, crowded edges of habitat, and human survival habits colliding at night. When natural prey fades, or when livestock and field animals cluster near people, the old separation between wild hunting ground and human resting ground starts getting thinner than it looks. The fifth driver stands out in polar bears, because their attacks show some of the clearest signs of predatory motivation instead of surprise defense or brief bluff behavior. A long-range study found 73 confirmed polar bear attacks from 1870 to 2014, leaving 20 people dead and 63 injured, and about 88% of the fatal attacks were predatory. Most attacking polar bears were male, about 61% were judged to be in below average body condition, and after 2000, about 88% of attacks happened from July through December. That timing matters because sea ice is lowest then, which means hungry bears spend longer on shore, move through human areas more often, and may inspect camps or work sites as possible food sources. Researchers were careful not to claim that polar bears suddenly became naturally meaner. The stronger explanation is nutritional stress combined with closer contact during the hardest feeding season. For a sleeping camper, that difference is terrifying because curiosity is one danger, but hunger inside a large predator can turn a tent from a shape into a meal-sized possibility. Now add the sleeping state itself, and the danger becomes easier to understand without turning it into myth. Sleep removes noise, speed, upright posture, and clear defense from the human side. The tent does almost nothing against smell, and predators can detect food, deodorant, toothpaste, menstrual products, fish residue, soap, sweat, and spilled drinks long before any zipper moves. If earlier campers stored food inside, that fabric shell may already carry the wrong lesson, teaching a food-conditioned bear that tents and calories belong together in one simple pattern. That is why managers treat a bear entering camps or defeating food storage as a major red flag, not a funny campsite story, because the animal is rehearsing the final step. Species also matter, because the same night attack can come from very different behavioral worlds depending on whether the animal is a bear, a big cat, a wolf, or a hyena. With bears, many attacks are defensive, but the most disturbing sleeping attacks often involve food-conditioned, habituated, or openly predatory individuals that already learned human areas can feed them. With lions, tigers, and leopards, sleeping attacks usually appear after the cat is already operating in a predatory mode shaped by injury, prey shortage, or long human overlap. With wolves, predatory attacks stay extremely rare in most modern settings, but when they do occur, children and sleeping people appear more often after habituation and food conditioning remove caution. With hyenas, historical and regional accounts from parts of Eastern Africa and the Horn describe attacks on sleepers where settlement design, famine, disease, waste, or weak night protection reduce separation. That pattern should change how we picture the event, because what looks like one animal suddenly choosing violence may really be a damaged boundary built by hunger, waste, injury, or crowded habitat. Humans sometimes damage that boundary directly through feeding wildlife, leaving trash, storing food badly, or keeping livestock in ways that pull predators into the same night corridor. Humans also damage it indirectly through habitat loss, prey depletion, war, drought, and climate stress that push both species into narrower spaces where small mistakes become fatal faster. Yet the research does not support the easy opposite claim either. Not every attack is purely human-made, because some are genuine predatory events by wild animals under harsh natural pressure. The point is not to erase the animal. The point is to see the full chain, because the number of attacks linked to altered behavior, altered habitat, or altered prey systems is too large to ignore. This is why the phrase sleeping attack can mislead people, because sleep is often only the final condition that made a long-developing problem suddenly visible and horribly hard to survive. The real attack may have started with a garbage can weeks earlier, a deer shortage months earlier, a jaw infection years earlier, or a shoreline season that kept a hungry bear on land. Even the timeline inside one animal can change slowly. First fear weakens, then boldness rises, then camps become familiar, then tents lose mystery, and finally a sleeping person stops seeming impossible. Once that progression reaches the end, the attack is not random at all. It is predictable in hindsight, which is why wildlife managers watch for those smaller warning signs so closely. For campers and people working in remote places, the lesson is brutally practical. Careful food storage and clean camps are not manners, they are behavior-shaping barriers for the next predator encounter. For communities living near big carnivores, the lesson goes wider. Protect prey systems, reduce waste, guard livestock well, and never let repeated low-level boldness pass as harmless curiosity. For viewers, the hardest idea may be the simplest one. Most predators do not naturally wait outside every tent for an unconscious person, and the research does not support that fantasy. The 440 attack review matters here again, because once predatory motivation enters the picture, the outcomes turn far deadlier, which is why about 91% of recorded deaths sat inside that predatory category. That number should change how we hear the word sleeping, because sleep is not the cause by itself. Sleep usually marks the moment a predator already crossed from avoidance into active prey selection. National Park Service guidance fits that pattern exactly. Once bears repeatedly access human food, they can lose fear of humans and even lose their normal preference for natural foods. Managers know that shift is dangerous because the same bear that steals garbage today may test tents tomorrow, and the same boldness that looks curious at dusk can become lethal at midnight. The Yellowstone bear from 2025 shows the sequence in plain order. Crush an empty tent, defeat food storage later, obtain food, and force officials to remove the animal for public safety. Wolves and coyotes show their own version of the same slide, where testing bites, camp visits, and bold daylight behavior appear before the truly predatory attack on a child or sleeping victim. Big cats show a different route because dental disease, jaw pain, and limb injury can turn zebra or buffalo into costly targets while leaving a human sleeper exposed and easier to overpower. Hyena accounts from Eastern Africa add one more reminder that settlement design and waste matter, because weak night protection and open scavenging corridors can pull scavenger predators closer to sleeping people. Polar bears make the hunger side impossible to ignore. 61% of attacking bears were judged below average in body condition, and after 2000 most attacks clustered between July and December. That seasonal pattern does not mean every hungry bear will attack, but it does show how nutritional stress and longer time on shore can move a top predator into repeated contact with tents and workers. Even the fabric itself becomes part of the danger, because tents block your vision but not the odor of fish residue, soap, toothpaste, deodorant, spilled drinks, or human sweat. What the strongest evidence does support is darker and more useful. When a predator attacks a sleeping human, normal avoidance has usually failed for a reason that began earlier and lasted longer. That reason may be crumbs, pain, drought, prey loss, sea ice, or years of unsafe overlap, but the common thread is the same broken line between where humans rest and where predators feed. So if this subject shocked you, watch the next story about the warning signs predators show before the final attack, because survival often depends on reading the invisible chain before night closes around it.